Hi, welcome back to Podpadstudios. I'm Master Maker and I'm building things again. Well, this is part 2 of the Dita build. Now, as you can see, I'm starting to cut metal now and starting to fabricate things. Now, if you remember, part 2 was the trailer system for the Dita. So obviously the Dita has got a fifth wheel on the back of it, a very high level fifth wheel. And the idea is that it has a very clever little locking system for the trailer. Now, a number of trailers can be actually pulled by it. Obviously, I could just do a straightforward, I've got lots of pictures here. I could just do one of these. In fact, let me get the bigger picture. It might be easier to see on the camera. I could do basically a standard tank transporter trailer. And in a way, all of these trailers pretty much, you know, they all kind of start off like this with the rear wheel section, the main loading bed, and obviously the main hookup system that goes onto the tractor vehicle. I've also playing around with this, which is quite cool. And as you can see, it's a missile launcher. Now, still requires the trailer. And as you can see here, I'm sort of working on the base system of the trailer. Now, I've been asked this quite a lot. In fact, I was asked this a couple of times in previous videos. And the question was, when you get to building the suspension bit, can you go through it in a bit more detail? So I'm going to go through it in a bit more detail. So if basically this bores you, fast forward to the end because there might be interesting things. But right, so how does the suspension work on these? So let me show you the bits and pieces. I use this stuff. Now this is carbon steel. It's in strips of about 15 or 20 mil. I can't remember exactly. 20 mil. 20 millimeter wide carbon steel, and it's very, very springy, and basically it's brilliant for making leaf springs. Now, obviously the leaf springs need to be supported by something. So what I do is I make lots of these, and as you can see here, I've got lots of them that I've already made up. And the idea is, I'll mock it up on here so you can kind of see. You've got these two basically pieces here. As you can see, they're kind of cut with holes in them and slots. And the idea is that I put a bolt through that, like that, and the same on this one here. Obviously these all need finishing off and a little bit rough at the moment. But once these two are together like this, then the leaf spring, obviously this is way too long. There's no way a leaf spring is going to be that long, goes between the two. So I don't know, I haven't measured it yet. The leaf spring will probably be about that long and it will sit between the two. Now, if that was just fixed in there, the leaf can't move. It can't function like a proper leaf spring. So what I've got to do is cut lots of these little spacers. And these little spacers are going to fit perfectly over an M8 bolt, as you can see there. They fit perfectly over that. Now, what that means is that I can weld these little spacers onto the carbon steel like that. And one there, one there. I've now basically got a proper leaf spring because it can now rotate, it can move. So obviously that will sit in between there. It's very difficult to show you on the camera without, because none of this is welded together, but that simply sits in there like that and then is bolted through. And it can then move up and down. And that basically gives me my support. So these are welded to an upright like that. And then basically the leaf spring sits in the middle. Now, how does the axle get onto the leaf spring? Really, really simple. Let me just take this wheel off here. The axle is just very, very simple. As you can see, it's just basically a piece of steel with some threaded rod at the end. That is simply going to sit, I'll just rest that on there for now. It will sit on there like that. I might run it underneath, or I might run it, whoops, over the top. Obviously, once this is all welded together, it sits together a lot easier. Now, how do I clamp that onto that? Again, really, really simple. I've got lots and lots of these things that I've done. And basically what happens here is that clamps underneath there, that sits on there, that sits on there, and it just basically clamps it together. And then that will give me suspension. It will give me my leaf spring. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, because obviously if I've got the leaf spring sitting in between there, I've got no adjustability at all. So what I do is I introduce one of these, which is the coil spring. Now that will sit here and it will sit on an adjuster. Now I haven't got anything at the moment made up, but just to give you an idea, it will be kind of, I don't know, something like that. Well, you get an idea, you know, it just sits in between that like that and pushes slightly up on that. And because there'll be an adjuster at the bottom of this, I'll be able to preload this and put this under a bit more tension, or make it softer or make it harder, depending on what you know, what I need for the spring adjustment. Welcome back. I've progressed. So this is part 2 of the Dita. And for those of you that aren't too sure what part 2 is a trailer system that's going to go on the back of the Dita. There's a 5th wheel that was placed on the top of the Dita. But I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. I'm going to do it in a very kind of science fiction-y Thunderbirds kind of way. So it will make the Dita, once this is on the back of it, look a little bit more futuristic, a little bit different. As you can see from the last time, I was talking about springs. I was talking about, you know, this carbon steel, how I was going to make the suspension basically. And basically you can see how I've done it here. What I'll do is just pop this wheel off. And then you get an idea how this actually all works. I think hopefully camera should be able to see this. But basically it's very, very simple. You can see the kind of the spring in there. You can see the brackets that I made up. There's the axle. And basically once you can see then the compression on that. Now I was going to make these adjustable. So basically these little springs, they just sit in there. Now without the springs, this is incredibly soft. Probably too soft. If I put that wheel back on and we'll have a look. Might be, I don't know. But you can see how bouncy that would actually be without those springs on there. Now, it might be that I don't use these ones and I'll cut these ones down, and these are much, much softer. But I found from kind of experience that adding these springs in just gives me that little bit of compression, which is, it just works a little bit better. I don't know though, we'll see. This is the whole point of adding these springs in. I can adjust them on these springs by changing the spring rates, and it completely changes the way the whole thing behaves. But you can see it's very, very simple. Risers, just a couple of blocks put in there. Nothing's lined up yet, it's all a bit twisted. This whole axle needs to move this way. It's all just been loosely kind of bolted together at the moment. Basically, that is the sort of rolling chassis now for the missile launcher. Now, if you remember, I was in 2 minds, and I'm still in 2 minds about whether this is going to be a tank transporter system and a missile launcher, or just the missile launcher. And I'm leaning now just towards the missile launcher, because I have an interesting idea of how I'm going to link it to the Dana. Originally, I was going to use this, which is quite heavy. I don't know whether you can, it's probably even going off camera now. This is connected to the front here, and it goes off, and then that 5th wheel clip there connects to the Dana. Dita, even. However, I've got an idea. Something I'm going to do a little bit different, and it involves a different kind of link. Now this link here, I haven't got my gloves on, so I don't really want to touch this, but it's 2 tubes that will slide inside each other here, and this would create a very interesting universal joint. Now, I'll explain a little bit more about it when I've played around with it and I've got it on there, and to see if it actually works. I did mention about an interesting idea of flexing the chassis, and I'm going to show you how this works now. So as you can see, I've welded up the chassis here, and I've got some start to get some mud guards over here. This is the other bit that basically fits in here like this. And that slots into there like that. Now, it's not going to look right at the moment because there's no weight on it, but you get the idea. This bit here obviously will be attached to the... I'll go that way a little bit. This is obviously going to be the main fifth wheel bit attached to the Dita, and then obviously this is the platform here. So the idea is the missile launcher section sits on here and will raise up on here, powered by an actuator. And then this bit here, this is the clever bit, this can move. It pivots. Now, it's not this bit that will pivot. This is the clever bit. This bit will stay rigid to the Dita. It will be this bit that pivots. So it's hard to demonstrate because it's not actually attached to something, but as well as offering full suspension, it will offer full tilt on the ground. So it will always remain parallel to the ground, even though the truck that's moving it might be moving around and this, yeah. Anyway, it's an experiment. It's a bit science fiction, a bit Thunderbirds, but that's what this build is about. This is not really a copy of any one existing missile launcher system. I mean, I did have a picture of it, which was that one that I showed you before. Bring that a bit closer to the camera, which is kind of my starting point. But that's not going to be the ending point. That also has multiple missile systems in it. I think 16 missiles it fires. This one, I'm going to go with either 2 or 4 much larger missile systems. And I think I've worked the next bit out. Now, this was the bit that I was telling you about before that I didn't want to tell you about because I wasn't too sure whether I could make it work. But I think I've worked out how to do it. So, when the missile launcher, you have to use a bit of your imagination here. When the missile launcher kind of lifts up, the doors on the back and the front of the missile silo will open. And then you will hear, with a speaker system built onto here, a countdown which will be 5, 4, 3. And at 3, we will probably hear engines engaged or engines ignited. And at that moment, there will be loads of flames that are going to come out of the back of the missile launcher, like the rockets have started up with the flames going. And then it will end with the rockets firing out, except the rockets won't fire out because there's something else I'm going to do, but I'll explain that a bit later on. So the flame system, I'm not going to do it with pyro in the same way that, for example, I've done the Dita. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do it with propane oxygen injection, like I did with the Batmobile flame system. But I've worked it all out now, so basically I will be able to house the cylinders without having, keeping them upright. And the routing of it all, it should work really, really well. So what you effectively see is you see this thing rise up, the doors open, loads of flames coming out the back. It'll look like the missiles are about to fire. Lots of smoke, and it will look really, really, really cool. Next phase now, the next bit, is the linkage system to raise the missile launcher. Now what I might do next is actually build the missile launcher. I might move this now, shelve this so to speak, build the missile launcher, because then I can get in the brackets and the hinging systems on this. Anyway, that's where I'm at so far on part 2 of the Dita build.